Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of GameSpark. I am Susie Grace, and today is episode 13, and I have another excellent guest here who is just waiting to talk games because we love talking games. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Mike McKenzie. I'm known as MacTastic in our Twitch community.
Yes.
And I'm actually a professor of 3D animation and game design. And
Are you really? I did not know that.
I am, yes. At Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, which is why I have soapboxes that we may or may not get to.
Yay! Oh my gosh, I can't wait. I cannot wait. Okay, yeah. So MacTastic has been a member of my community for not super long. Do you remember when? Like what?
Almost a year.
Really? Nice.
Yeah.
I love that. MacTastic is an excellent addition to my community. Lovely person. And without further ado, I'm going to jump right into our first question. What is your earliest gaming memory?
That's an easy one.
Okay.
Growing up, we had a little sort of vacation house on a lake. It was like a little mobile home.
Mm-hmm.
And out on the porch, we had our Atari 2600. And me and my sister, we'd play Combat, which was a game about H's that were supposed to be tanks. And the H's would shoot blocks that are supposed to be bullets.
Okay.
And they would go across the screen, excruciatingly slow. And then they would shoot, and you'd have to move, and you'd be like, gotta move, oh, God. And then that's what made it so exciting, because it was so excruciatingly slow.
Because it was so slow. Okay, so I'm sorry, you had an Atari on your porch?
Yeah, we had, the porch was sort of like semi-converted into an indoor.
Okay, so it had
that was kind of like our game area. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'm like imagining like my front porch, which was open, just having a random like TV and console sitting out there. Okay, all right, that makes sense. That makes more sense. I can't say I've actually heard of Combat, but maybe I have. I don't know. But excruciatingly slow Combat.
You needed a lot of imagination back then.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Earliest gaming memory. Excellent. Okay, so my next question for you is, what is your spark game? The game that kind of got you hooked on gaming forever?
I mean, it'd be really easy to throw some Nintendo games out, because that's when I kind of got into my own when it came into gaming. But I would say my parents split really early in my life, so I bounced around. And at my dad's house was where basically all the fun stuff was. He was the one with the funds.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
He was actually an engineer for Honeywell, and he helped make the space shuttle. They contracted for NASA.
Are you serious?
And so I was a space nerd growing up. I loved space. I wanted to be an astronaut for the longest time.
That's really cool. I love space too, but I'd never want to go. No way.
Yeah. I guess my first sort of console technically would be a Tandy Color Computer 3.
Okay.
And he got me all the bells and whistles, and my favorite game on that was Mickey's Space Adventure.
Of course it was.
That was probably also my first role-playing game.
Okay, wait a minute. Mickey as in like Disney? Or was it a random? It was Mickey, like legit.
Yeah. Yep.
Mickey in space.
Yeah, Mickey and Pluto are walking down the road, and then an alien spacecraft comes down, and they decide to explore it, and it takes off and whisks them off into space, and the adventure begins.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. I've never even heard of that game. I'm going to have to look that one up. And that, you say that was like your first role-playing game?
Probably, because it was one of those, Mickey and Pluto are walking down the street and they see a spaceship. What would you like to do? And then you would type in, go into spaceship. And,
oh man. What fun.
That was the first game that I can remember that was like my own. I have my own memories. It's not just family, playing Atari or something. And that's one that I really invested in.
That's really cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. My next question for you is, what is the first game you played and beat all by yourself?
Probably a toss-up between Super Mario Brothers 2 and the original Legend of Zelda.
Okay.
I got a Nintendo a few years later than when it came out, but those were like the first, obviously Super Mario Brothers 1, but Super Mario Brothers 2 and Zelda were the two that I got with it, or at least fairly early.
Mhm.
And I remember investing lots and lots of time
Yeah.
into those games.
Well,
And
Super Mario Brothers 2 is a challenge. It's a hard game. I mean, all the Super Mario Brothers games, especially the old ones, were relatively challenging. I have never beaten Super Mario Brothers 2. I've beaten 3 and I've beaten 1.
that's because you
beaten-
don't have the power.
What is that?
It's Nintendo Power.
What is Nintendo Power? I want Nintendo Power.
You don't know what Nintendo Power is?
I don't.
It's the only way that I could beat games back in the day. It's a magazine. Nintendo had its own magazine.
Okay,
back
so
in the
that's like
day.
like it was a companion.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah. They
gosh,
would have tips and tricks and things for games, and I had a subscription, and I was the only one in the neighborhood that had it, and I may or may not have exploited that by charging kids in the neighborhood some money for tips and
Little
I
entrepreneur.
had to make some income early.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, no, I did not know Nintendo had something like that. That's crazy. I could have used it because I've never beaten Super Mario Brothers 2, and I've actually never even played the original Legend of Zelda. Excellent work beating both those games totally by yourself with Nintendo Power.
Totally, with no help at all.
With zero help. Hey,
Just totally
listen,
figured it out.
there's a difference between reading tips and having like the controller pass to somebody else to do something. So I say Nintendo Power is fine. I would have used Nintendo Power. Okay, my next question for you is, what are 3 games that have impacted you the most?
I would like to ask if I could cheat a little bit.
Most people do.
Because this was a very, it's obviously very difficult to pick
Right.
3 games.
Right.
But for me, there's a lot of games that meant a lot to me, but they don't mean a lot, or they mean more to me because of the games I played before.
Okay.
And I'll try to explain that. So
Okay.
like, I come from an era, I'm not saying that, my childhood is better than anyone's, but I came from an interesting time where I'm almost as old as really the modern game industry. So every time, like, when Nintendo was out and Super Nintendo was on the horizon, we didn't know about console generations. There were no console generations. So
Right.
everything was new, and we had no idea what games were capable of or where they were going to go. So even within the same generations, like sequels or going from Nintendo to Super Nintendo, it was mind-boggling.
Mhm.
It was,
Yeah.
and then every time that happened, we'd be like, well, that's it. Can't get any better. We're done. That's, and then they would do something next. So,
Which still continues to happen. Because I find myself being like, that's it, we have peaked. And then boom, they release something else that I'm like, oh no, 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 no. This is it. This is it. This is where we peak. And they still continue to do that. It's totally mind-boggling.
For example, like, I'll use Nintendo because that was a big thing. I had a Nintendo and then into Super Nintendo. But Mario, for example, I think Nintendo has always done best when they sort of redefine themselves every game. And they kind of do not so good when they latch onto a formula. They say, okay, this has worked. Now let's, and the beautiful thing about that era is you had Super Mario Brothers 2, or at least our Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, and Super Mario World on Super Nintendo. And while the core mechanic for each one was the same, they were all vastly different. They were aesthetically different. They were musically different. So for me, it's hard to say. I mean, I know there's people out there that can say, well, clearly Mario 3 is better than Mario 1. But for me, I can't do that. I can't, like, the beauty of those 4 games, and you could even put Mario 64 in there, because that was just, they're all firsts. You know, they're all unique.
Yeah. I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, before they started falling into patterns. So you could take all of them, and that's, I can't say like Mario 2 was better than Mario 1 for me. It's like all 4, those first 4 games, I have to kind of bulk them.
Yeah. No, that's totally understandable. It's kind of more like I don't want to necessarily say like the entire franchise, but I've never really thought about it that way, but they're all very unique in their own ways. And I don't know if I could necessarily say any of them are better than any of the other ones either, because they're just so different.
Another franchise for me, obviously, it's one for a lot of people, was Final Fantasy. Mm-hmm. And Final Fantasy in particular was very impactful for me, because every time I thought I played a great game, I'd play the next one and just be absolutely mind blown. And then the next one and be absolutely mind blown. I started with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which was on Super Nintendo. And it was designed to be an introduction to RPGs for the American audience that the Japanese thought we were not very good at. We didn't like a challenge. We weren't good at RPGs. So they're like, here's this little dumbed down thing that you Americans can play, and it worked for me. Like, I bought into it.
You loved it.
Yeah. I was at a Blockbuster Video, and I saw Final Fantasy Mystic Quest and Final Fantasy 2. And I thought Mystic Quest was the first game. I didn't know that the first Final Fantasy was on NES. That just kind of missed that one. So I played Mystic Quest thinking it was the first one. And yes, it's very simple, but I loved it. I really enjoyed it going through. So after I beat it, I picked up Final Fantasy 2. And I was mind blown. All of a sudden, like, this Mystic Quest is like very simplistic. It has characters, but they're very generic. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's you got to save the world by collecting the 4 crystals, and it's very formulaic and linear. And then I play Final Fantasy 2, and all of a sudden there's this huge political drama, and there's all these characters with motivations, and there's things going on, and like I was blown away by the narrative. And I was calling friends, and I was getting friends in on it. Like, we were so like excited, and it was just this crazy melodrama for this whole thing. And then, of course, in any typical Final Fantasy fashion, when you finally get to the end, the rock music starts and space happens in this big giant monster thing. And
Classic.
30 hours later, 30 hours later, I beat it. And then sometime later, Final Fantasy 3 comes out, and I'll try to keep it somewhat spoiler free here.
Spoilers sometimes.
But there might be some minor spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers sometimes.
Yeah. So I put in about 30 hours into Final Fantasy 2. And so when Final Fantasy 3 came out, me and a buddy had a weekend sleepover. We were going to just play the heck out of it. And 30 hours into it, we are at this area that we clearly know is the end. I mean, it is setting up for the end of the game. The music is incredible. This place is like alien, and we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to beat it. And there comes this point where the story takes a big swerve. We watch slack-jawed as everything just goes down the drain. And then it keeps going. And then we're like,
oh, I love that. I love that.
And then it keeps going, and there's a whole other game to play afterwards. And we're like, oh my God, we're not done yet. 30 hours later.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Long game then.
Yes, it was incredibly long. And it's that example where it's like in those days, we didn't know what could be done. And
Yeah.
like every game was a revolution. My kind of general observation is, back then, every generation and every game was a revolution. Whereas nowadays, every generation is more of an evolution. We've
Yeah.
seen it before, but it's better.
But it's
Graphics are better.
better,
Maybe the lighting's
prettier.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah. But back then, when you're going from one generation to the next or one game to the next, it's just revolutionary what they can do, and just how much more was in there, and how much more capable they were of storytelling and things like that. So it was a really interesting time where, like, every few years there was this big epiphany for me on what games could be and experiencing them. I would like to mention one more.
Okay, please do.
And that is a game called Thief. And
never heard of that one.
This is in the late 90s. 3D is just sort of coming into play. And the big thing is, first person shooters. Doom is out, Quake is out, and they look all okay, but I'm not a big first person shooter guy. I never was.
I'm not a first person shooter either.
Yeah. And for my graduation, I got my first computer, and there were a couple games on there, and one of them was called Thief, and it looked like a first person shooter, but I gave it a try, and once again, it showed me what games could be. I had no idea. So you are a thief, true to the name, and it is in first person, but it's designed to, you're not supposed to be seen. You're trying to steal. Yeah. I just remember I turn it on, and the very first mission is to break into this rich guy's mansion and steal a scepter. And you start off in the middle of the street, and I'm right by the entrance to the mansion, and there's two guards there. And as I walk past the guards, one guy starts talking to the other guy, and they start having a conversation, and the conversation keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And I'm like, wow. So I was just standing there slack-jawed, not actually playing, just hiding behind a wall, listening to these two guards banter. And just little things like that just floored me, because again, I had no idea that games could do that. You had so much freedom to do whatever you want. There wasn't and it wasn't like you could do this or this or this. It was just like, when you found a way into a place, or when you found what you were looking for, you felt like you figured it out. You didn't figure out what the developers wanted you to figure out. You figured it out on your own. An example is you have bow and arrows, and you have these different types of arrows, and you have rope arrows where you can shoot a rope arrow into any wooden texture, and a rope will come down, and you can climb that rope.
Got it.
And so a lot of modern games today are like, you could only shoot it in this area. You can only climb the yellow paint.
Yep.
The whole yellow paint thing.
It's always these yellow markers that, it's always yellow. Why is that?
Yeah, it's always these specific areas that are clearly marked, and obviously that's where they want you to go. But the cool thing about these games is there was none of that, or at least the genius of it was you had no idea that there was any of that. Like, there were so many times where I felt like, did I just cheat the game? Like, did I just bypass half the game because I found a way to finagle myself up the corner of this house and get in on a balcony when I was supposed to go down the street over here? Like, so and you just felt even more accomplished. And sometimes you felt like you were cheating the game, but it was still, that was part of the game. If that's the way you figured out to get in, then that was the way you were supposed to.
My next question for you is, have any games made you cry?
Yes, okay. A lot of games. I know there's been a lot of games. It was hard to remember. Like, I remember the more recent games, but I do want to focus on one. But I will mention, I do remember when I beat A Link to the Past, there were some happy tears, especially when the most profound thing for me on that game is, you beat it, and there's two endings. There's the one ending where it's showing you got the fanfare,
Yes.
and it's saying your uncle returns, and Zora's fishing, and it's just showing the world.
Everybody's
afterward.
cool now. Everybody's happy.
And then that all fades, and then you have just this nice, quiet orchestra, and you start to see the Triforce spinning, and everything's really dark. And then it starts to get lighter, and you realize that the background that you're seeing is the Dark World, and the Dark World's turning back into the Golden Land to this peaceful, serene music. Yeah. And it's just the music itself was really moving, and this is when I got misty-eyed. But then it's kind of doing this nice slow movement musically, and then it starts to transition into bum, 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 and then you're like, oh. Yeah. It just moves right into it, and then in the background you hear dun 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 dun, dun, and it starts to get louder and louder, and then it just finishes up on this wonderful crescendo of the Zelda theme. And yeah, I was done.
Yep.
That was just
that theme song, man. The things that theme song does to me.
That's the first one I can think of. I know that there are more because I'm a very kind of emotional person. Obviously, Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom I definitely got misty-eyed, but I was more moved when I watched you play it.
Oh gosh, I was such a mess.
I feel that, and I tend to get emotional. I share the emotions.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm drawn to games, but I'm also drawn to artists in general and people who appreciate art. After I beat it, I was just skimming YouTube, watching people beat it and get all emotional and whatnot.
Yeah, lots of tears. Tears of the fandom.
Yeah. And I saw your video of going through the dragon tears.
Oh, yes.
And what moved me the most was you didn't just cry, you wept. You mourned.
Oh my gosh.
A loss.
It wrecked me. I do remember I literally pushed my microphone away and put my hand because I could
just
not.
Allowed yourself to grieve, and that was. I hope that whoever was in charge at Nintendo for that story decision, or who worked on that, I hope someday, if they haven't, that they'll see your reaction to that and just and just appreciate that, because as an artist, that would give me so much meaning if I knew somebody engaged with my work that much and it meant that much to them. I mean, that's why artists do art, I think.
Yeah.
A quick honorable mention.
Okay.
Final Fantasy 16. It has this is going to be a hot take, and this won't
I haven't played it, so I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't affect my love of all the other Final Fantasy games I've played, but this one has easily become my current favorite. It has easily surpassed every other game that I've played. There are people that disagree with me.
Yeah.
That's fine. But for me, it was exactly what I wanted. I saved the most impactful for last.
Okay.
This one legitimately made me cry because it did hit home as well. And this is Baldur's Gate 2. The most impactful thing for me in those games is the characters that you meet. And it was another one of those situations where I didn't know what you could do in games. And then playing this game, I was like, oh, you can do this.
You can do this.
Games. And it didn't have 3D graphics. It was an isometric kind of top down. So you didn't have emotions. You just had text. But the way they could deliver story in text is phenomenal. And this one I have to spoil a bit. I don't know if you'll ever play it, but
I don't have a whole lot of interest in Baldur's Gate, but so spoil away.
So there's a character named Keldorn, and he's this older gentleman, and he's a very holy knight. He's a paladin, and he is a very religious person. But his whole progress, when you keep him in your party is having to face all of these flaws, and realizing that even, does he really have faith in his God, or is he just following the religion? That really hit home for me because I'm a God following. I believe in God. I'm a Christian, but I've never struggled with my faith, but I certainly have struggled with religion.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And he really becomes the foundation with which you can lean on. He becomes your support, especially when you're getting to, towards the end of the game and I play a good character. You can choose to embrace your evilness and just be evil, but I always played the good character.
Okay.
And it can be very challenging to, like, there comes times where you lose control and you just turn into this monster that has no control, and you have to learn how to try to control your powers without being, without succumbing to them. And he really becomes this pillar of strength for you. But at the same time, you can see that he's moving away from the organized religion and into what faith really means. And at the very end of the game, it shows you a picture of each of your party members, and it'll show you a synopsis of, like, their epilogue, their individual epilogues. And for Keldorn, it says, after he traveled with you, his time of adventuring was over, and also his time at the church was over. He retired and he lived out his life peacefully with his family. But then he was called to service one last time because this army was coming, and he heeded the call one last time, and him and 5 knights fended off this enemy so that the rest of the army could get there. And he won the day, but he fell in battle. And as his knights looked on, I'm going to get a little emotional here, but
that's so sad.
It says, as his knights looked on, the hand of his God came down. And when it went away, Keldorn was gone. And from that day on, whenever someone of faith prayed to their God and they would see a vision of their God, they would see Keldorn standing at his right hand. And that moved me. It's moving me now. But it really spoke to me because it was like Keldorn started as a Pharisee and became a true believer.
Yeah.
By the end, he set all the laws aside and all the tenets aside and said, I just want to have faith and share it.
That's one of those that is one of the reasons I am trying to talk to people about their gaming experiences, because I am just shocked that it's so kind of spiritually powerful. What an amazing experience to have. I bet I probably would have also been in tears. So my next question for you comes on a different day because we had to split this up between 2 days. So my next question for you is, what are your top 5 favorite video games?
Well, I've talked about quite a bit of them.
Okay.
And like I said before, a lot of them are more like series, or a couple of them in a series, because they, experiencing one makes the next one better for me, and they kind of mesh in. But obviously I said a lot about Baldur's Gate 2. That's probably definitely one of my tops. And it's also a go-to when I feel like I want to play Western RPG, D&D without the work.
Okay, so it's like a comfort game, kind of.
Yeah, it is. The most impressive thing is how they can really evoke emotion with just writing. There's really no animation in there. There's no cutscenes. There is voice acting, but it's a real testament to it's like reading a novel, like a visual novel almost. Of course, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom really sort of brought me back to, not brought me back to games, but finally brought me back to investing in games. I would say, pound for pound, if I had to pick one favorite that if I could only ever play one game again, and it doesn't mean that it's the best story or the best anything, but just pound for pound, I would say Skyrim.
Interesting. I've never played Skyrim.
I want to give credit where it's due to the developers. It's a good game, but it wouldn't have the timelessness that it has now if not for the modding community. That game can literally
Oh,
be whatever you want it to be. With just a little bit of attention to it, you can make this game that is worth playing even 13 years later. It keeps up with everything. That's a real testament to the modding community. And I really don't have faith that that will ever happen again. And then a quick shout out to the Ys games. Have you heard of Ys? Y-S?
Ys?
Ys. Y-S.
Y-S?
It's
No.
a very old series. It's still going on today. It's older than Final Fantasy by a few years. You're probably not going to cry. It's not like the most amazing storytelling, but it's fun. It's good. It's still good story, but it's kind of anime-esque art. The neat thing about the East series is every couple of games, they totally revamp the gameplay.
Oh,
So
cool.
you have these eras of games.
So my last question for you is, why do you like playing video games?
I know the answer, but I've been struggling to try to explain this.
Okay.
So I will do my best. My entire life, I've considered myself a creator. Like I've always wanted to create, and every time I'm inspired by something, I want to create something like that. I've always been not impressed, but like really moved by when people are moved by art. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I joined your community and started watching your show. You weren't just like, oh, it's such a good game. Like, you were emotionally moved. And to me, I'm like, if I could do that, if my creations could just do that to one person one time, that would add so much meaning to my life, especially at the times when I feel like I'm not, really contributing to, to society or to life or, things like that. Sometimes we can feel like we don't have a lot of meaning. If, if a friend or a family member came to me and said, if they say, hey, I read your book, that's so awesome that you read a book and I'm showing it to everybody. I'm like, thank you. But that's not as meaningful as like, I read your book and I really took an interest in this character and I just wanted to delve a little deeper into, this or that. That means the world to me. And I want to pay that forward. So when every time I see somebody react to a video game or a movie or something, I imagine what that artist who contributed to that would feel. And so if I want that for myself, I would like to give that, whether they know it or not. I would like to give that to those artists and developers. And that's especially in my adult life, that's really why, I play games, to kind of pay that forward and just hope that, someday I can do that for somebody too, whether it's make them laugh or make them cry or just make them engage with something. It's one thing to just play something, but it's another thing to engage with it. And if you'll let me, I wanted to finish up with a little dedication here, since we're around Mother's Day. One of my most formative systems, growing up was the Super Nintendo. I started way earlier, but that was when I kind of came into my own, like just seeing what games could be. But another reason was what that system actually meant to me from a life experience. And my parents divorced when I was very young. After they divorced, there was a pretty heated custody battle for me, and my mother won full custody from me for me. But there was a big transition because she didn't have a lot of money. She was a single mother trying to raise 3 kids. It was a very, challenging time. And so I talked about like the Tandy and the Atari and all that stuff I grew up with. Well, that was all at my dad's. So when I lost contact with him, I lost a lot of that stuff, which is fine. But there was kind of a stretch where I didn't have much of anything. And then I still got things, but I tended to get them late.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was the last one in the neighborhood to get a Nintendo in like 88 or 89. it makes sense because that's, probably around when the price dropped. And again, that's totally fine. But I distinctly remember, reading in Nintendo Power in around 1990, they're showing like the next new thing, and here comes this thing. It's going to be called Super Nintendo, and they're showing screenshots. And I don't remember the context of the conversation, but I do distinctly remember saying to my mom, I wish just one time I could be the kid in the neighborhood who's like the first to get the new thing. And then everybody would come to my house instead of all of us going to so-and-so's house or somebody else's house. And I legitimately had no intention of like manipulating her. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just it'd just be nice sometime. And I still vividly remember it was 9 days before my birthday. I'm in my bedroom with a buddy of mine, and we're just horsing around. And there's a knock in the middle of the day. There's a knock on my bedroom door, and I open it up, and there was my mother with a Super Nintendo. It was launch day.
Oh my
of the Super
gosh.
Nintendo. She left work on her break and went to wait in line to get a Super Nintendo on launch day. And I mean, obviously I was excited and things, but that day, everybody came over to my house because nobody had it. Because it sold out. I don't even know how she really got it, but she took that to heart, and that experience, and that was the only time that ever happened. That never happened again, and that's totally fine because I kept my promise. I just wanted to experience that once. And later on, talking to her as an adult, I had never realized just how much of a sacrifice that was. She was really in a financial hole for doing that. That was $200 at the time, which is probably $700 or $800 today.
Yeah, that was a lot.
And so I really appreciate that, and I carry that with me. And even now, yes, I'm fortunate to be able to collect things, but I always find that when I find myself spending more time looking at things that I want and buying things that I want, as opposed to enjoying what I have, not only do I know that I need to stop that, but I need to let something go. I need to feel the loss, the pangs of letting something go. So that's when I'll, streamline stuff. But I really credit that to that one time that my mom was able to give me that experience. And I've tried to stay true to that. I just wanted to feel that once. And so, yeah, shout out to my mother for doing that. That's something I carry with me forever.
Moms are superheroes.
Yeah.
And there's nothing quite like them. I think that's such a lovely, lovely memory. And that is kind of, I mean, I don't know, I guess you played games before that, but that speaks so loudly as a kind of a game spark moment as well. That's lovely. That's really, really lovely. I just really, really appreciate you taking the time, 2 days now out of your busy schedule.
I appreciate it. I don't get enough of that. I don't get enough opportunities to talk with people who share the same interests and passions as I do. So I do really appreciate it.